You might have seen that just this morning there were new figures released showing that there are now over 1 million young people in our country not in education, employment or training. It's actually more than a statistic. It's a warning that far too many young people are reaching adulthood only to find the door to opportunity closed. They're NEET. It's an ugly term, but it's a term with ugly consequences too. Aspirations thwarted, confidence drained, futures narrowed before they've properly begun. During the course of this review over the last few months, I've met, spoken, heard the views of hundreds of young people. Their voices sit at the heart of this report. Behind the statistic lie 1 million individual lives, all different, but with one thing in common. Not one of them wanted to end up being not in education, employment or training. I start with a very simple proposition. When Pat first asked me to do this work, I came to it with this view. Every young person has something to give, a skill, an aptitude, a potential. Every one of them should have an opportunity to learn or to earn. But the NEET rate in our country has barely been below 10% in 25 years. It's one thing to be ignorant about a problem. It's quite another to be neglectful. And I'm sad to say that for far too long in our country, the NEET crisis has been swept under the carpet. Not any longer. This review exists because today Britain faces a genuine generational fault line. We do not just have a chronic problem. It is getting worse, not getting better, and we have neither a system or a plan to deal with it. A decade or more ago, the problem was temporary youth unemployment, and youth unemployment today is still, of course, far too high. But now it is something deeper and far more corrosive. It is youth detachment from the labour market. Nearly 6 in 10 young people who are NEET today are economically inactive. That means they not only don't have a job, they're not looking for a job. 6 in 10 have never had a job. 20 years ago, that figure was closer to 4 in 10. Detachment is no longer temporary. For too many young people, it is becoming permanent. If the current trajectory continues, within 5 years, we forecast in this report that today's 1 in 8 young people who are NEET will climb to 1 in 6. We are at risk of a lost generation. There is much talk, of course, of this being an economic or a fiscal crisis, and indeed it is. The cumulative cost to our country of almost 1 million young people outside of education and work is estimated in my report at £125 billion a year, more than we spend on education. But the principal cost isn't borne by the taxpayer. It's borne by the young person. Being NEET has a long-term scarring impact. Cost to their confidence, cost to their health, cost to their future income. For those who spend the whole period from 18 to 24 years of age outside of education and work, as about a quarter of 24-year-old NEETs do, the lifetime loss can approach £300,000. That is not an abstract number. It's a deposit never saved, a home never bought, a pension never built, the hope of a good life never realised. So this is more than an economic crisis. It's a moral one. So the question today is no longer whether the current position is somehow unfortunate, it's whether it's sustainable. My answer is no, it is not. As a growing older generation becomes increasingly reliant on the next generation to sustain it, every young person has to have more opportunities to learn or earn and to get a job. The problem is that for too many young people, opportunities are not growing, they're shrinking. Reversing that starts with understanding what is driving it in the first place. This is the first of 2 reports that I'll produce, as Pat was saying. The next, in the autumn, will provide proposed solutions to the NEET crisis. This first report diagnoses the problem. It contains a huge amount of data analysis, new research, surveys of young people, employers, teachers, health professionals. During the course of this review, we've spoken to countless organisations. Disability charities, youth organisations, businesses, schools, colleges, health professionals, councils, mayors, political leaders. I've been around politics and public policy for more decades than I care to remember. I can genuinely say I've never come across an issue as visceral as this with the public. Wherever I've been, whoever I've spoken to, I've come across a deep concern, bordering on a fear, about the future facing young people. Parents are more worried than ever about their kids. Grandparents too, about their youngsters' prospects for a job, a home, a decent future. For decades in Britain, the foundation of our unwritten social contract has been that each generation would be able to do better than the last. That great British promise for this generation is being broken. The 1 million young people who are NEET are its leading casualties. They've been hit by a perfect storm. A generation ago, almost 2 in 3 of this age cohort were in work. Today, it's barely 50%. For under 18s in education, the number also holding down a job has halved during that time. Now, there's been much focus about the impact on youth employment of recent policies like the youth minimum wage and the rise in national insurance contributions. Employers repeatedly raised this with me as an issue, and it is true. The changes have had an impact. It's always a risk for an employer to take on a young person precisely because they're unproven. So if public policy wants more young people in work, it has to minimise risks and maximise incentives for employers. But no one should pretend that the structural change that has been taking place in the youth labour market has only recently been triggered. Over the last few decades, Britain has had a jobs boom, but one that has largely passed young people by. Entry-level jobs have long been in sharp decline. Compared to the start of the century, there are 1.6 million fewer low and medium-skilled jobs in the economy. Vacancies in hospitality have halved in the last 4 years. Saturday jobs have long since been in free fall. Apprenticeship starts amongst young people have fallen by 35% over the last decade. The first rung of the ladder in careers has thinned. For too many young people, it is now simply out of reach. That places them in a hopeless catch-22 position, where employers ask for work experience, but opportunities for young people to gain it have either narrowed or have gone. And by the way, that is before the impact of the AI revolution to come on jobs and workplaces. For decades, falling labour market participation was offset by rising education participation among the young. But in recent years, that too has plateaued and has marginally fallen. The biggest falls have been in further education and apprenticeships, the routes most accessible to the potentially NEET cohort. Fewer opportunities there in education mean more young people ending up being NEET. So none of this is a recent phenomenon. It's a long-term structural change. And yet for too long, public policy has treated youth disengagement mainly as a supply-side problem. Make young people more employable, raise standards in schools, improve their skills, toughen their benefits. All of these things matter, but they're not enough if the labour market, the demand side, is no longer reliably bringing people in. It's striking that almost 1/3 of today's NEETs have got good GCSEs, 15% have a degree. Being NEET used to be something that happened to other people's children. Now, parents in all parts of the country worry it could be their child. If the NEET problem is to be solved, change will be needed not just on the supply side, but on the demand side too, in labour market policy and in employer practice. Both will be needed because there's also been a fundamental change in the makeup of who is becoming NEET. There is no singular explanation for the NEET problem worsening, but there is one standout change. Over the past decade, the proportion who say they're NEET due to a work-limiting health condition has increased by 70%. The proportion of NEETs citing mental health or conditions like ADHD and autism as their primary condition has more than doubled. For the first time in perhaps 2 centuries, changes in health, especially in mental health, are impeding economic growth and causing a contraction in the supply of labour. Poor health reduces participation. Reduced participation worsens health. Worsening health makes return to work harder still. This is the vicious cycle that simply isn't being broken. Once health-related inactivity takes hold, it sticks. That's what makes the problem more entrenched than it has ever been before. Of those who fall into health-related economic inactivity, our research suggests that almost 8 in 10 remain neat more than 2 years later. The damage done to the life chances of those young people is almost incalculable. And here, there is an elephant in the room question. How much are young people themselves to blame? Have they become softer, flakier, less resilient, more willing to blame mental health than actually suffer from it? That is not what I've found. One of the most striking findings in this review is that 84% of NEET young people that we surveyed said they wanted a job or they wanted to be in training. So I do not accept the caricature of a generation that is not interested in work. This is a generation that wants the chance to work. I do not accept that mental health is simply an excuse. We've drawn on Professor Peter Fonagy's brilliant work on mental health prevalence, which confirms that distress among the young is real and it is rising. I do not accept either that the answer is to tell young people who are struggling simply to try harder. The young people I have met are trying, applying for dozens, sometimes hundreds of jobs, hearing nothing back. And it is silence that does not just dent confidence, it kills hope. There is no shortage of effort on the part of young people. The shortage is of opportunity and of support. Young people today are different. Not worse, not lazier, not less capable. Different. They've grown up in a digital world. They were hard hit by the pandemic. They're more open about mental health. They are more anxious. In a world of greater uncertainty and less opportunity, perhaps that is not so surprising. Every generation is different from the one that went before it. The systems that support them into adulthood have always had to adapt. This time, they have not. That is not a failure of young people. It's a failure of a system stuck in the past. Of course, personal responsibility matters, effort matters, habits matter, families matter. Aspiration cannot be gifted by the state. Young people have obligations, families have responsibilities, parents as well. But it is dishonest to pretend that individual effort alone can overcome systems that are designed to solve yesterday's problem and not today's. My core diagnosis is that the system set up to support young people from the world of education into the world of employment is no longer working. In too many cases, it does not just fail to tackle the problem, it reinforces it. Whether it is education, or health, or welfare, that system fails to enable their participation in the labour market. Instead, all too often, it ends up putting young people on a path to a life not in jobs, but on benefits. Take education. Good qualifications are still one of the best defences against a young